What if I told you that living paycheck to paycheck has almost nothing to do with how hard you work? What if I told you that millions of people who follow every rule, get educated, get a job, stay loyal, budget carefully, still end up stuck in the exact same financial loop for decades? And what if the real reason isn't laziness, poor discipline, or bad math, but a system that quietly reshapes behavior, rewards short-term survival, and punishes long-term planning? Because here's the mystery. Why do people who earn more money often still live paycheck to paycheck? Why do raises feel invisible? Why does getting ahead always seem to move further away the closer you get? This isn't a motivational speech. This isn't a budgeting tutorial. And this isn't another stop buying coffee lecture. This is a story. A story about how the paycheck to paycheck cycle was built, how it expanded, why it traps people psychologically, why most fixes fail, and how a small group of people quietly escape it. By the end of this video, you'll understand what's actually happening, why it feels so hard to break free, and what has to change, not overnight, but step by step, if you ever want real financial breathing room. But to understand how to stop living paycheck to paycheck, we first need to understand how it became normal. The origins. When paychecks were enough to understand the paycheck to paycheck problem, we have to rewind. Not to last year, not to the last recession, but to a time when the phrase paycheck to paycheck barely existed. The post-war financial contract after World War II, much of the Western world, especially the United States, operated under an unspoken financial contract. The deal was simple. You worked full-time, you stayed loyal to one employer. You gained experience over time. Your wages rose faster than your expenses. And in exchange, you gained stability. One income could support a household. Savings grew naturally. Debt existed, but it wasn't required for survival. Most people didn't think about financial optimization. They didn't track expenses obsessively. They didn't binge personal finance content. Because they didn't have to. Why this worked? This system worked for 3 reasons. 1. Wages rose with productivity. 2. Housing was cheap relative to income. 3. Debt was limited and regulated. People weren't financially brilliant. The environment simply made stability easier. But this world didn't disappear overnight. It eroded quietly over decades. And most people didn't notice. Until it was too late. The rise. How the trap was built. The paycheck to paycheck cycle didn't begin with bad choices. It began with structural shifts. 'Cause number 1, wages stopped keeping up. Starting in the 1970s, something subtle happened. Worker productivity kept rising, but wages didn't. Companies produced more value with fewer people, yet paychecks stagnated. At first, inflation masked the problem. Then credit stepped in to fill the gap, and that's when the second shift occurred. Cause number 2, debt became a feature, not a bug. Credit cards weren't originally designed for survival. They were convenience tools. But when wages flattened and costs rose, debt quietly became a bridge between what people earned and what life required. Medical expenses, education, housing, transportation, debt stopped being optional. It became structural. And once debt enters the picture, the paycheck changes meaning. Your paycheck no longer represents income. It represents distribution. Money arrives and immediately leaves. Cause number 3, subscription economy. Then came the invisible drain. Monthly payments. Not big purchases, but small, recurring ones. Phone plans, insurance, streaming software, financing fees, individually harmless, collectively suffocating. People didn't overspend in one dramatic moment. They normalized permanent outflow. And that's how the paycheck-to-paycheck lifestyle quietly spread to people who looked successful on paper. The breaking point. When survival becomes the job, here's where the story turns darker. Because once someone lives paycheck to paycheck long enough, the problem is no longer financial. It's psychological. The scarcity loop. When money barely lasts until the next payday, the brain shifts into scarcity mode. Scarcity changes behavior. You focus on immediate problems, long-term planning feels abstract, risk feels dangerous. Mental bandwidth shrinks. This isn't a character flaw. It's neuroscience. And here's the brutal irony. The longer someone stays in scarcity, the harder it becomes to escape. Not because they're incapable, but because the system consumes their attention. Why budgeting often fails. This is why traditional advice fails. Budgeting assumes surplus. But paycheck-to-paycheck living often means there is no margin. Every already has a job, one surprise expense resets progress, so people try harder. They restrict more, they blame themselves, and the cycle deepens. The fallout. What paycheck-to-paycheck really costs. The cost isn't just financial. Cost number 1. Time. People trade time for money, then trade money to survive, leaving no time to change strategy. Cost number 2. Health. Chronic financial stress correlates with anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, cardiovascular issues. Cost number 3. Identity. When survival consumes energy, people stop asking, "What do I want my life to look like?" They ask, "How do I make it to Friday?" And that question shapes everything. Failed fixes. Why most advice doesn't work. Let's address the myths. Myth number 1. Just earn more. Income helps, but without structural change, expenses rise to meet it. Lifestyle inflation isn't stupidity. It's adaptation. Myth number 2. Cut all enjoyment. Extreme restriction increases burnout. Burnout leads to rebound spending. Myth number 3. Be disciplined. Discipline matters, but systems beat willpower. And most people were never taught to build systems. The modern parallel. Why this is worse today. More people live paycheck to paycheck than ever before, including high earners. Why? Because the modern economy rewards constant availability, debt-funded lifestyles, financial complexity, and punishes pauses, simplicity, slow progress. The pattern repeats. Different decades, same trap. The escape. What actually breaks the cycle? Here's the delayed answer. People who stop living paycheck to paycheck don't start by saving more. They start by creating margin. Step 1. Control cash flow. Timing, not totals. Timing. Breaking the cycle requires space between income and expense, even if it's small. Step 2. Reduce fixed commitments before variable spending. Fixed expenses are chains. Variable expenses are levers. Step 3. Build psychological safety. First, an emergency buffer isn't about math. It's about reclaiming mental bandwidth. 3 takeaways. Takeaway number 1. Living paycheck to paycheck is often systemic. Not personal. Blame doesn't solve it. Understanding does. Takeaway number 2. The goal isn't wealth, it's margin. Margin creates choice. Choice creates freedom. Takeaway number 3. Escape is gradual, not dramatic. No lottery moments. No overnight flips. Just consistent widening of space. Final warning and open-ended thought. Here's the warning. If nothing changes, the system doesn't collapse. You adapt to it. Years pass. Stress normalizes. Dreams shrink quietly. But here's the open-ended thought. What could your life look like if your paycheck stopped feeling like a countdown clock? Call to action. If this video helped you see the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle differently, share it with someone who feels stuck but blames themselves. Subscribe if you want more deep system-level breakdowns of money, work, and freedom without hype or shame. And remember, breaking the cycle isn't about becoming rich. It's about finally having room to breathe.